Is Iran quietly building a new anti-Western alliance in Africa right under the West's nose? Iran's decision to share its security expertise with Burkina Faso suggests that it has recognized the threat the West poses in Africa and is stepping in to help Africa resist. But here's the real question. Why is the West letting this happen? Or is it powerless to stop it? Can the West afford to ignore Iran's growing foothold in Burkina Faso, or has it already missed its chance to act? Let's find out. What happens when a nation, long squeezed by sanctions and global isolation, starts flexing its influence far beyond its usual reach? Iran, a country often sidelined by the West, is making bold moves into West Africa, sharing its security expertise with Burkina Faso. The West, caught off guard, scrambles to respond. But this isn't just routine diplomacy. It's a strategic power play that directly confronts the West's long-standing dominance in Africa. Iran is making its move, and the West should be concerned. Mojtaba Fagihi, Tehran's top diplomat in Ouagadougou, recently declared Iran's readiness to share its expertise with Burkina Faso in critical areas like security, health, and the economy. This isn't just any diplomatic gesture, it's a calculated pivot, one that signifies a deeper partnership as Burkina Faso, alongside its allies in the newly formed alliance of Sahel states AES, drifts away from Western-controlled bodies like ECOWAS. The timing is no accident. With Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger all under military rule, these nations are forging new ties with non-Western powers like Iran and Russia, signaling a realignment on the global stage. To grasp the full weight of Iran's expanding influence in West Africa, we first need to know what's driving Tehran's interest in Burkina Faso and what goals Iran aims to accomplish through this strategic partnership. So, why is Iran looking to West Africa?
Despite imperial aggressions and sanctions imposed by the US, Venezuela is still standing. It's extending its hand to Iran to build a new world.
Iran's interest in West Africa may seem like an unexpected development, but in reality, it's a calculated move by Tehran. For decades, Iran has faced economic and diplomatic isolation, particularly from Western powers. This isolation has forced Iran to seek out alternative allies and economic partnerships. Over the years, Iran has deepened its ties with non-Western powers like Russia and China, and now it is expanding its reach into regions that have traditionally been dominated by the West, like West Africa. The Sahel region, which includes countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, has become a hotbed of instability in recent years. The rise of insurgent groups combined with political upheaval and economic challenges has created a security vacuum that Western-led interventions have failed to fill. Iran, with its long history of dealing with insurgencies and asymmetric warfare, sees an opportunity to step in and provide the expertise that these nations desperately need. But why now? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now.
President Raisi's visit to Africa is in line with his administration's efforts to create new alliances with the non-Western world in the current era of transition in international relations from a unipolar world to a multipolar system. It is also in line with his look to the East policy of expanding economic and political relations with the non-Western world. Iran is looking for closer relations with Africa to diversify its economy.
The recent formation of the Alliance of Sahel States AES, which includes Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, marks a turning point in the region's political landscape. These countries, all ruled by military juntas, have made it clear that they are no longer willing to be subservient to Western-controlled institutions like ECOWAS. By withdrawing from ECOWAS and forming their military alliance, the AES nations are signaling their desire for greater autonomy and independence from the West. This is where Iran comes in. Iran sees the AES as a potential ally in its broader struggle against Western hegemony. By offering its expertise in security, health, and the economy, Iran is positioning itself as a valuable partner for the AES nations as they seek to build their own security and economic systems, free from Western interference. This is not just about helping Burkina Faso, it's about Iran expanding its influence and building alliances in a region that has long been under Western control. Furthermore, Iran's involvement in Burkina Faso is part of a larger strategy to increase its global influence. For years, Iran has sought to challenge Western dominance, particularly in the Middle East. Now, it is looking beyond its traditional sphere of influence and expanding into new regions, like West Africa. By forging alliances with countries like Burkina Faso, Iran is gaining new economic and political partners while simultaneously weakening the West's hold on the region. While Iran's motivations for engaging with Burkina Faso are clear, what does Burkina Faso stand to gain from this partnership? Or simply put, what does Burkina Faso gain from Iran's expertise?
Thank you. I agree with Ali that there's some continuity, but there are also some nuances and new contexts to be paid attention to. One is Iran's own sense of isolation, still facing U.S. sanctions, but also seeking to repair relations with African countries such as Egypt and Morocco, and closer home in the Horn of Africa, seeking to play a larger role in a region where
Burkina Faso, like many countries in the Sahel region, is grappling with several significant challenges. Chief among them is the growing threat posed by insurgent groups, which have taken advantage of the region's political instability and porous borders to expand their influence. For years, Burkina Faso has struggled to maintain security and stability, despite receiving support from Western nations and international organizations. However, the solutions offered by the West have often been ineffective, if not counterproductive. The failure of Western-led interventions in the Sahel is one of the primary reasons why Burkina Faso is turning to Iran for help. The military junta that currently governs Burkina Faso recognizes that the Western approach to security has not worked. Despite years of foreign aid and military assistance, insurgent groups like Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb AQIM continue to pose a significant threat to the country's security. In this context, Iran's offer of security expertise is particularly appealing. Iran has spent decades dealing with asymmetric warfare and insurgencies, both within its borders and through its various proxy groups in the Middle East. From its support in Lebanon to its involvement in the Syrian civil war, Iran has developed a deep understanding of how to fight unconventional wars against non-state actors. This experience could prove invaluable to Burkina Faso, which is facing similar challenges from insurgent groups operating in the Sahel. In addition to its expertise in counterinsurgency operations, Iran also has experience dealing with economic sanctions and managing a struggling economy. Burkina Faso, like many countries in the region, has been heavily reliant on foreign aid and loans from international financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. However, this aid often comes with strings attached, forcing Burkina Faso to adopt policies that may not be in its best interests. By partnering with Iran, Burkina Faso can reduce its dependence on Western aid and explore alternative economic models that offer greater autonomy and self-sufficiency. One of the key components of Iran's offer to Burkina Faso is also the establishment of a pharmaceutical production unit. This is a significant development, as Burkina Faso's healthcare system has long been underfunded and overstretched. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the weaknesses in the country's healthcare infrastructure, and many people in Burkina Faso still lack access to basic medical care. By setting up a pharmaceutical production unit, Iran is helping Burkina Faso strengthen its healthcare system and reduce its reliance on imported medicines. Moreover, the establishment of a pharmaceutical industry in Burkina Faso could have broader economic benefits. It would create jobs, stimulate local industries, and reduce the country's dependence on foreign aid. In the long run, this could help Burkina Faso build a more resilient and self-sufficient economy, which is less vulnerable to external shocks. While the benefits of this partnership for Burkina Faso are clear, the broader implications of Iran's involvement in West Africa go beyond security and economic development. This partnership is part of a larger geopolitical struggle that is playing out on the global stage. So, how does this partnership challenge Western influence? For decades, the West has maintained a dominant position in Africa, using a combination of economic aid, military assistance, and diplomatic pressure to exert control over the political and economic affairs of African nations. Institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund (IMF), and ECOWAS have been key tools in maintaining this dominance. However, these institutions have often been criticized for imposing conditions that prioritize Western interests over the needs of African nations. The rise of the Alliance of Sahel States (AES) and its growing ties with non-Western powers like Iran and Russia represent a direct challenge to the West's traditional dominance in the region. By forging alliances with countries like Burkina Faso, Iran is not only expanding its influence in West Africa, it is also weakening the West's hold on the region. One of the main reasons why countries like Burkina Faso are turning away from the West is the failure of Western-led interventions in the region. Despite years of military assistance from the United States, France, and other Western powers, the security situation in the Sahel has continued to deteriorate. Insurgent groups have expanded their operations, and political instability has made it difficult for governments to maintain control over their territories. In contrast, Iran's approach to security is based on its own experiences in dealing with insurgencies and asymmetric warfare. Rather than relying on large-scale military interventions, Iran has focused on building relationships with local militias and proxy groups, providing them with the training and resources they need to fight on the ground. This approach has allowed Iran to achieve its strategic objectives in the Middle East, and it could prove to be a more effective model for countries like Burkina Faso that are struggling to contain insurgent groups. Iran's growing influence in West Africa is also part of a larger geopolitical shift that is taking place as the global balance of power changes. In recent years, Iran has deepened its ties with Russia and China, two of the world's leading non-Western powers. Both Russia and China have been expanding their influence in Africa, and Iran's involvement in Burkina Faso could be seen as part of this broader strategy. Russia, in particular, has been making significant inroads in the region. Through its private military contractor, the Wagner Group, Russia has been providing military support to countries like Mali, which, like Burkina Faso, has distanced itself from the West in recent years. China, meanwhile, has been investing heavily in infrastructure projects across Africa, using its Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) to build economic and political ties with African nations. By aligning itself with Iran, Burkina Faso is not only gaining access to Tehran's expertise, it is also positioning itself to benefit from the broader alliances that Iran has built with Russia and China. This could provide Burkina Faso with new sources of investment and development assistance, further reducing its reliance on the West. As Iran and other non-Western powers continue to expand their influence in Africa, how is the West responding to this challenge? Are Western nations adapting to the new reality, or are they doubling down on their old strategies? The West's response to Iran's growing influence in West Africa has been largely reactionary. Rather than rethinking its approach to the region, the West has doubled down on its traditional strategies of military intervention and economic sanctions. However, these strategies are proving to be increasingly ineffective, as countries like Burkina Faso and Mali turn away from Western-led institutions like ECOWAS and explore new partnerships with non-Western powers. One of the West's primary tools for maintaining control in West Africa has been ECOWAS, a regional organization that has traditionally been aligned with Western interests. When Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger withdrew from ECOWAS and formed the AES, the West responded with threats of military intervention. ECOWAS, under pressure from Western powers, even considered launching a military operation to restore democratic order in Niger, following the military coup in July 2023. However, this heavy-handed approach has only served to further alienate the Sahel nations. The failure of Western-led military interventions in the region has become increasingly apparent, and countries like Burkina Faso are no longer willing to accept Western dominance without question. By aligning themselves with Iran and Russia, these nations are signaling that they are ready to chart their path, free from Western interference. In addition to military threats, the West has also relied on economic sanctions to maintain its influence in Africa. However, these sanctions have often had the opposite effect, driving African nations to seek out alternative sources of investment and development assistance. Iran's offer to set up a pharmaceutical production unit in Burkina Faso is a direct response to the West's failure to provide adequate support for the country's healthcare system. By offering practical solutions to Burkina Faso's development challenges, Iran is positioning itself as a more reliable partner than the West. This is part of a larger trend in which African nations are increasingly turning to non-Western powers for investment and development assistance. China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), for example, has provided African nations with billions of dollars in infrastructure investments, while Russia has been expanding its military presence in the region through the Wagner Group. The West's reliance on aid and sanctions reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the changes taking place in Africa. The Sahel nations are no longer willing to accept Western dominance, and they are increasingly turning to non-Western powers like Iran and Russia for support. The West's failure to adapt to this new reality is leaving it isolated and increasingly irrelevant in the region. As the West struggles to maintain its influence in Africa, what does this mean for the future of global power dynamics? The partnership between Iran and Burkina Faso is not just a bilateral agreement. It is a reflection of a broader shift in global power dynamics. For decades, the West has operated under the assumption that its dominance in Africa was secure. But the rise of new alliances, such as the AES and its growing ties to Iran, Russia, and China, signals a new chapter in global geopolitics. The West's dominance in Africa is no longer a given, and the partnerships forming today will shape the global landscape for decades to come. The growing partnerships between African nations and non-Western powers like Iran and Russia are part of a broader trend in which African nations are asserting their autonomy and seeking out new partnerships that offer them more control over their affairs. This shift is not limited to West Africa. Across the continent, nations are exploring alternatives to Western-led institutions and forging new alliances with non-Western powers. For African nations, these partnerships offer several key benefits. First and foremost, they provide African nations with greater autonomy and independence from Western-controlled institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and ECOWAS. By partnering with countries like Iran, Russia, and China, African nations can explore new models of development that are not constrained by the conditions imposed by Western institutions. Second, these partnerships provide African nations with access to new sources of investment and development assistance. China's Belt and Road Initiative, for example, has provided billions of dollars in infrastructure investments across the continent, while Russia has been expanding its military presence through private military contractors like the Wagner Group. Iran's involvement in Burkina Faso is part of this broader trend, providing African nations with new options for economic development and security. For the West, this shift represents a significant challenge to its traditional dominance in Africa. For decades, Western nations have used a combination of military intervention, economic aid, and diplomatic pressure to maintain control over the political and economic affairs of African nations. However, this approach is no longer working. The rise of new alliances between African nations and non-Western powers is weakening the West's influence in the region and challenging the global power structures that have defined the post-World War II order. Iran's involvement in Burkina Faso is just the beginning. As African nations continue to explore new partnerships with non-Western powers, the global balance of power will continue to shift, with the West increasingly finding itself on the sidelines. This is not just a challenge to Western dominance in Africa, it is a challenge to the entire global order. So, to sum this up, the partnership between Iran and Burkina Faso is more than just a diplomatic agreement. It is a reflection of a changing world. As African nations assert their autonomy and seek out new partnerships, the global balance of power is shifting. The West, long accustomed to its dominant position in Africa, must now contend with new players and a new reality. The future of Africa is one of choice and independence, and Iran's involvement is a clear sign of the times. The West can no longer take its dominance for granted, and if it does not adapt to this new reality, it risks being left behind in the new global order. Is Iran's entry into West Africa the final nail in the coffin for Western influence on the continent? Should Burkina Faso welcome Iran? Is it a game-changing moment? Let us know in the comments section. What can West do? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.